What's going on, guys? It's KY, not Kyler Creative, and we're back again with another video. Now, I get it. Davinci Resolve color grading can get confusing, and a lot of you guys have moved up into the Sony system. We're using 10-bit color, using all of these high-end codecs, and you want to be able to make the most out of your color grading. And today's video, I want to talk about how I color grade my S-log3 footage using Davinci Resolve. Now, if you guys are coming from Premiere Pro or Final Cut Pro, this might look a little bit confusing, but by the end of this video, I want to make sure that you guys understand the node system a little bit better. Now, if you've never opened Davinci Resolve, there might be some things you need to know in terms of opening up serial nodes and things like that, which we'll talk about in this video. But after everything, I want to be able to make sure that you guys know how to color grade your footage. Now, this is going to come with a caveat in saying that I am not a professional colorist. I don't have nearly as much setup or nearly as much knowledge as some of the other channels. And if you guys want to go and check out some really good color grading channels, it will be in the description below. This is just how I do my color grading process when I have S-log3 footage and any log footage in general. So if you're using any sort of log 10-bit footage, these are some of the methods that are going to work for you guys. So I'm going to stop talking. We're going to get into the computer and we're going to start grading. All right, so we're going to be in Davinci Resolve. And we're actually gonna start color grading this S-log3 footage. So first thing we're gonna do before we start anything is we're gonna make sure that we're in the proper color management tool. So I'm gonna go to my gear here, right down at the bottom right corner, and on my color management tools. Now, I'm gonna change my color signs from Davinci Y RGB to Davinci Y RGB color managed. I'm gonna click off my automatic color management, and I'm gonna go to HDR Davinci Wide Gamut Intermediate. Now, there are a couple of different videos that show why this is a better color space to edit into, but basically the easiest way to explain it, it's gonna help you get the most out of your S-log footage in 10-bit. Now, what we're gonna do is we're looking at a bunch of nodes here. Now, if you don't know how to create different nodes, you're just gonna press Option S, and it's gonna help you create something called serial nodes. Now, these are in order, so everything that has happened up until number 11 is dependent on what happened in the 10 before it and backwards and so on. So this is the way that I kind of structure my node if I'm going to do a quick and dirty color grade. So my top level here is fixing any of the exposure or anything that I had messed up in camera while I was shooting, because it's going to make qualifying and creating my look that's going to be my second level a heck of a lot easier. So we have white balance, exposure, contrast, and saturation. Now that we have all those dialed in, we're going to go into our skin, make sure our skin tones are pretty accurate and make sense for our look, which is going to be where you're going to see the magic stuff, where you're going to see all of the adjustments made to create your creative look. Any adjustments I want to add into here, and then we're actually going to start on number 8, which is our color space transform, and adding in a conversion LUT. So these aren't where you're going to put LUTs that you would get from your favorite YouTube creator. They're going to be LUTs that are built into Davinci Resolve to help make sure that you have an accurate grade. And then to just finish off and just add a couple effects just for fun, we're going to use glow and grain, which are two commonly used nodes and effects that you will end up seeing. All right, now that I've said that, we're going to start with the color space transform node. So I'm going to go to node number 8, and I'm going to open up my effects. Now, if you're looking for an effect, you just have to press onto that magnifying glass, press color space transform, and add it into my CST node. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to match the camera that I shot on to the camera, the gamma and color space that I want to change it to. So what I'm going to do is I know that I shot an S-log3, also saw it in Sony S Gamut 3.cine. So I'm going to click onto that, and then I'm going to go into my S-log3. Now it looks a bit dark there. Do not panic. That's normal. I'm going to change this to my Arri Alexa, which is the output color space. So we're kind of emulating an Arri Alexa color space. And then my output gamma is going to be Arri Log-C. Now I can go ahead and close that. And then I can move on to my LUTs. So Davinci actually has a Arri Alexa LUT that's in there to convert it to Rec 709. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to my LUT category, my LUT node, and I'm just going to double tap that. Now that you're looking at this right here, it seems to look pretty good. It looks passable. If you want to have a Rec 709 conversion, you can use something like that. But I want to make sure that we have a lot of finesse and a unique look to our color grade. So typically I wouldn't export as just that, but I mean, if you wanted to adjust your contrast and your exposure value, you might be able to get away with just using those 3 steps. That being said, I'm going to get into this grade. Okay, what I'm going to get you to do, I'm going to get you to get up, take a walk around, take a second. You're digesting a lot of information. So like grab a snack, take 5 minutes, and comment down below, are you absorbing any of the information? Does it make a ton of sense? And whatever questions you have. Did you take that second? Okay, you can go back to work now. So right off the bat, I'm gonna look at my white balance. What I wanna do is I wanna try to get all of these lines to be a nice clean white. Now I could tell right about here, if you look closely enough, that there's a little bit of blue coming up on top of here. So it is leaning a little bit more to the blue color balance. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna click on my note here, and I'm just gonna go to my temperature, and I'm just gonna move this up until those lines are a little bit more cleaner and a little bit more white at the tops and bottoms. Now that wasn't a too big of an adjustment. Typically you don't want to have to go a far way to make sure you get the proper white balance. You would get that in camera. Next is my exposure. So what I want to try to do is I want to try to make sure that I expose for all of the information that are on here. Right now we're still kind of in a log-like kind of format with everything's kind of crushed and lifted. So I want to start to expand that because I do have the dynamic range. So when I want to go up in my gain, I'll go too far and then I'll pull it back. So once you see this line flatten, you know you've gone too far. Now it's flat and it's solid, it's gone too far, I've clipped and I've lost information. So when I drag it back, it kind of pulls out as much as it possibly can, which looks pretty good over there. Then what I'm gonna do with my lift, I'm gonna look at this bottom part right here, is I'm gonna pull this part too far back, and notice that that line solidifies out. So what I gotta do is I gotta pull that part out. I gotta pull out those crushed blacks to try to get as much as I possibly can. Now this isn't necessarily perfect. And then there we have it. So I do have a little bit more of a darker in my mids, and I want to try to bring those up. So I'm going to go to my gamma, and I'm just going to inch them all the way up. Again, you want to make sure you don't have any flat lines. In this stage, you want to just try to make sure you expose for the most information as possible. You can always adjust to change those things later. All right, so there we go. We're at a pretty good starting point from an exposure perspective. And then I'm just gonna go to contrast. Now, it might be a little bit redundant using exposure the way I did with contrast, but this is just a personal preference of mine where I'll bring my contrast value up. And what it does is it pulls away your brightest brights and your darkest darks, and it starts to pull them away from each other. You can see that distance between the two lines getting farther and farther. I'll pull that part up, and then I'll start playing around with my pivot. Now what pivot does is it helps move that bias, whether or not you want to put on the lighter or the darker side, and keeping that contrast the same back and forth. And I'll move this around right up until I get to where I want to go. So I just want to make sure that my shadows have a little bit of exposure without blowing out my highlights. There's not a big difference here at the end of the day. If you see these two, it's not too drastic, but that's just kind of something that I do as a ritual step. Next thing I'm gonna do is my saturation. Now the skin tones here are pretty well exposed, they're pretty well saturated, but what I tend to do is I will just bring this bad boy up just a little bit, maybe just to 55, because it does stand out from the scene, just to make it easier when I start making my keys to start making sure I qualify my skin tones and making sure they look nice. So what I'm gonna do is now that that's all kind of set up and ready to go, I can start kind of keying things out and making my look, starting off with qualifying my skin. So I'm gonna go to my eyedropper tool here, and I gotta make two adjustments here. So first I'm gonna make one to the skin. And the way that you do that is you take your eyedropper tool, you go to your qualifier, you kind of highlight it over the skin, you click over top of it, and it should give you a read, which you'll see down here in terms of the range that it thinks it's in, and you start to have to fine tune these things to make sure that you just got the skin tones you needed. So the way that I do that is I press Shift H, and it'll start to show me where that map is and where I actually clicked on that qualifier. So you can tell right here, there's a bunch of hair in here. The lips are clearly not the same tone as the skin, so I have to start kind of narrowing down the selection to make sure that I can see things properly. So what I do is I go to my width here, because that's the width of this guy, and I'm gonna start pulling this backwards. And you see it's getting smaller and smaller, and then I'll start pulling it away until I start to see colors come out. So now you can start to see the hair is getting a little bit better. The lips aren't as much into that key, and we're almost right about here. It seems pretty good, and I'm just gonna play back and forth with that center just to make sure that I'm trying to get as much out as I possibly can. It's never always gonna be perfect, but I wanna make sure I get as much as I can. Then you can adjust the saturation, because if there's any other levels of saturation that are in there that are stuck in that key, it could get fixed or caught in there. There's nothing in here. And then your luminance as well. So if there's that color inside of your darks or your whites, it might make your life easier, but oops, it's clearly not in there. Now, a couple things I'm gonna do before I start changing anything is I'm going to start adjusting my matte finesse option. So first thing I'm gonna do is I'm gonna increase my blur radius. as you can see right here, there's little tiny pixels and little tiny dots here. And if I start adjusting my skin tone right away, what's going to end up happening is it might make an appearance of some noise because there isn't a clean transition from here to there. So I have to make that transition as easy as possible. So by making your key a little bit blurry, it helps soften that up a little bit. I'm also going to use clean black. So clean black basically takes out anything that should be black that has a little bit of the color you're looking for in it, and helps clean that up a little bit. And clean white does the exact opposite. So it'll add some of those back in if I start pulling and pushing those. So clean black, I'm just going to adjust until I get as much as I possibly can out. I'm going to go to my matte finesse and I'm going to add some denoiser too, just to make sure that that transition from skin tones, if there's any other color that's in there, it makes it a little bit easier. Now, right now I'm set onto waveform in my Resolve kind of graph options. I'm going to change my waveform to vector scope. And I see this line that's right here. Now this is a skin tone line or a blood line or whatever you would like to call it, but basically this helps you qualify skin tone. So basically saying if you are a African American, Caucasian, Asian, indigenous, whatever race you are, every single skin tone falls along this line. And you can use that as a guide to help make sure that your skin tones are properly exposed. Now, as you can see, mine is pretty close to that line. It's not super far off, maybe a little bit of the tail end. Which might even be the hair. It's a little bit onto the yellow side, but I want to try to get that as even as possible. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go over to my primary, and right on my hue, I could actually move this back and forth. So I could actually just move this a little bit, and that's all I really need. I only need about a point and a half stop of my hue, and then when I go onto here, you can tell it's fairly saturated into here. The skin is fairly saturated in there, and but it's accurate. So what I'm going to do here is, because it's fairly saturated and it looks a little overdone, I'm going to pull that back a little bit. Now, something I noticed right away is the lips are super saturated, so this looks a little bit off. If I'm playing this back, you can tell right away that kind of jumps out in your face. So what we're going to do is I'm going to move some of these nodes off a little bit just to give me some room, and I'm going to make something called a parallel node. Now this is going to be used by using Option P. I'm just going to make some room here. I am using a laptop here just because most of you guys are probably using laptops and not monitors to edit. And I'm just going to name this node by using Control L, and I'm just going to put ellipse. And basically what I want to do is I want to try to bring this level a little bit more in line with your skin so that doesn't jump out right in your face. Now, if that's a creative choice of yours to make that so, you can, but it's not one of mine. So I'm going to use the same thing I did with my skin. So I just took my eyedropper, put it over the lips, press Control H. Now I got to try to find the qualification for here. So what that means is I don't want the skin and I don't want the hair. I just want to get this part around here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to make this smaller and smaller and smaller till I start to see the skin go away. So now I'm starting to see now I can see the skin going away, skin still going away. And then I'm also going to move this center because I think it's right about here. And this is where it gets a little bit tricky. Now what I can do is I can offer some denoise to this image. Some clean black, that'll help out a little bit. It's actually helping it a lot. And I have to make some blur radius as well. I'm just gonna play with that luminance, see if I can get a little bit more of that darker area out. That's not it, I actually added things I don't want in there. And that is as far as I think I'm going to be able to get to. So you still do have a little bit in here. Not an entirely perfect key. There are some advanced tools that you can use to make sure you just get here. But for the sake of this simple tutorial, I'm not going to go super crazy. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to my saturation. I'm just going to drag that down a little bit. So now that looks a heck of a lot normal. So this is after, this is before, this is after, this is before. So it's quite a big difference. It's not as in your face that's there. And I'm just going to change my hue. I'm just going to play with the hue back and forth just to see if I can get it to like a natural color. So this is where we're going. That's a lot better than what that would have looked like. Even bring this, even can use a little bit lower saturation. I'm also going to bring the contrast down just so it's not super neon in your face. And there we go. So that's going to be pretty much how we have qualified our skin tone. So let's go backwards from where we started. All right, so we're at our color space transform to our Arri Log-C, our LUT that converts it. We just did a little bit of a white balance adjustment. You could actually see that in the back of the wall there, just to make sure that our white balance is nice and dialed in. Our exposure to make sure we can see all the information we need. We adjust our contrast ratio a bit just so our lights are light and our darks are where we need them to be. Saturation just to make qualifying our skin tone easier. Skin is nice and qualified, and then we made an adjustment on the lips so we don't look like a highlighter. We all love a good break, and it was so nice that I had to put them in twice. Because this is like a 20-minute plus long video, take yourself a second break at this point. This is where you're gonna be able to kind of like walk around, kind of, you know, get a snack or something, or have a monster, because if it's like 2 o'clock in the morning, like when I'm shooting this video, you're probably gonna need it because you need to have it edited for the next day, which is actually an entirely unrealistic expectation for you guys to do. So if you are watching this 2 in the morning, thank you, but go to bed or finish watching this video. So now we can start to make our look. So this is where you start to get a little bit more creative. And I'm gonna go for more of a blue shadowed, orange toned look, that teal and orange that everybody likes a lot. And what I'm gonna do is I'm actually gonna use curves for this one. I'm starting to like using curves to make looks like these because you can make really subtle adjustments. So instead of starting off right here, I'm actually gonna go from my Y, which is basically your luminance values. That if you see your S curves in your Lightroom tutorials and stuff like that, you'll know where that comes from. I'll actually use that later and I'll use it last. And I'm gonna go to my red. So the opposite of red is cyan. So if I make a dot here, if I go up, I'm gonna go way, way more red. And if I go here, I'm gonna get way, way more cyan. So what I gotta do is I gotta plot points in an S-curve kind of fashion to balance out this look, because I do want to have some blue and cyan into the shadows. So what I've gotta do is I gotta find out where it looks the best. Now, if you guys aren't familiar with curves, anything past this midpoint, going over to the left is going to be your darker areas, your shadows and your blacks, and anything going over to the right is going to be your lighter areas and your highlights. So what I'm doing is I'm just adding or subtracting cyan or red from my darker areas. And then on this end, I'm putting it back in to help balance it out. So right now I'm just paying attention to my cyan and then my skin. And I could always go back into my skin node and change the hue, and I could always adjust the key and how intense this look is later on when I'm done. I'm just gonna go to my green. And you wanna do this with every color to make sure things are dialed in. All right, so that's a quick and dirty kind of base grade that we're gonna put onto here. Now, this looks a little bit intense. You can tell it washes out the blacks and the darks, and the skin tones are looking a little bit different. That's how we're starting, and that's how we're ending. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna go over to my key and my key output tool. Now this, what it does is sort of like the adjustment layer opacity that you would see on Davinci, that you would see on Final Cut Pro or on Premiere Pro. And I'm just gonna dial that back a little bit because I still want that look. I don't wanna go all the way back and go back to where we started, but I still want that look. So I can go down to like about 70%, and that still looks like quite a big difference. Now what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna make an adjustment right over here. I'm just gonna move this over here just to make my life easy. And I'm gonna go back into here, and like I said, we're gonna use 2 types of curves that are here. So now we're just gonna use our normal curve, where if I wanna pull these black values down a little bit or a little bit higher up, I can. I am gonna lift that just a little bit, like not even a point or two. Go to my midtones, and I'm just going to lift this part. Actually, I'm going to drop it down a little bit, and then right up here, just kind of give it that look right over there. So that's how we're looking so far. Now, another tool that I use when I'm doing my adjustments is my luma versus saturation. So what I want to do is I want to try to clean up a little bit of the blacks and a little bit of the whites, just to get a little bit of that bleed out of there. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to try to make my darkest parts actually dark. So my eyedropper tool's on here. I'm gonna click the darkest part of the image, which I think in this case is the shirt. Once you click it, you're just gonna click the one that's in the middle when it gives you those 3 dots. And just gonna drag that down. Now you don't have to go too crazy because you actually might lose some colors elsewhere, but drag it down as much as that you can see that that's a nice cleaner looking black. And then I'm just gonna let that feather out to here. I'm just gonna let that feather out to there. So that makes a lot of sense. And then I'm gonna go up to here, click on the top there, and I'm gonna do the same thing. I'm just gonna drag that white end down. Now, if I do that, you could tell that on the side of the face, that doesn't look very good. So I gotta move that down, not as badly as I would on my blacks. I'm gonna feather that over here and over there. So there we go. Just a little bit of a smoother gradient between that adjustment. And this is pretty much what we're looking like. So if I want to shut off these two nodes to see what we've done here, that's what it looks like after, and that's what it looks like before. So you do see quite a big difference in your grade here, especially when we have all the skin tones dialed in and all your exposure there as well. Now we can get into some of the last effects that are on here. I am sorry, this does look kind of like a mess. This is the laptop version that I'm going to be using just because I want to keep it a little bit more relative, because not everybody is using expensive monitors. So I'm going to go and search. I'm going to put my glow right onto here. Now this is super quick. What I'm going to do is I want to try to give this a more softer Tiffin Black Pro Mist look if you guys have used any of those before, or you can't afford it and you want to be able to do it in post. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to my shine threshold right here. I'm going to pull this back too far. That looks disgusting. I'm going to pull it back right about here, just so I get a little bit of halation between the white parts of the image going into the dark. And then what we do is I'm going to get that spread up, because when I adjust a setting here later on, it's going to help spread that glow across the image instead of just in one spot. Then once I've gone down to here, I'm going to go to my composite type. I'm going to go to find soft light. Now you can tell that got a lot darker real quick. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to take my shine threshold. I'm going to bring that up even more. And I'm going to bring my spread up even more from that as well. So I'm going to bring these two things up. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to bring the saturation back here. Sometimes on glow, if you leave the saturation too much, kind of gives you colors you might not like. I'm not a huge fan of that color shift, so I do bring it back a bit. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to my blend, because right now it's great glow up here, but I'm not sure about down here. It's a little bit dark for me. It looks a little bit more obvious. So I'm going to do is I'm going to blend that look in. So I'm just going to blend that in. I'm going to blend it to like maybe like 34%. And a very subtle effect, but that's what it looks like before, and that's what it looks like after. So it kind of gives you that Tiffin Black Pro Mist look, and actually helps me get a little bit more darker in my black. So this looks pretty good from what I'm looking at. And then lastly, I'm gonna go on my grain, because everybody likes a good film grain. So what I'm gonna do is I put my grain option there. Oh, I gotta do it again. Put my grain effect on there. I'm gonna use 35mm grain film. Some people like 16. That's just my personal preference realistically. And then I'm gonna take my grain strength, and I'm gonna get really extreme with it and see how terrible that looks. And then I'm gonna pull that back just to see if it looks the way that I want it to. Now, an easy way to see this as well is to go to your waveform, and you can tell that if I adjust that grain, you can see how much effect it has in your scopes. So I'm just gonna bring that back just a little bit. And then my grain size, I don't want that to be too big. I kind of want it to be a little bit smaller. And then my texture, I can actually do with a little bit more texture. Now, on your histogram, you're gonna notice that, or on your waveform, sorry, you're gonna notice that that's gonna be a little bit different here and there. So if I wanna kind of go full screen, that's what it looks like without it. That's what it looks like before. So it's not super, super crazy. It just gives a little bit of texture in your images. And there we go. And that's what our grade is looking like. So let me turn everything off, and then we'll go in order of how everything looks. So let me just close these things down. So we started off with the color space transform to Arri Log-C. We went into our LUT to convert it to Rec 709. We got our white balance in check to make sure that these are properly balanced. We got our exposure to make sure everything is properly enabled to be seen. Our contrast ratio the way that we liked it. Our saturation to help out with qualifying our skin tones to make sure they're dialed in for our look. We did our skin just to make sure that that was all qualified, but obviously we have a little bit of highlighter action going on in here because of the saturation. So we actually brought that down to balance that out. We got our look going on into here. We made some adjustments to some of the black and white points and a couple different things in there. Added some glow to actually help out with the black levels and give it more softer, more filmic kind of look, and then our grain. Now, once that's all finished, you don't have to do this again for every single clip. But what you can do is you can just click over top of this, press Command C, go to your next clip, obviously it's on graded, and then press Command V, and you can see that it has a lot of the effects that are into here as well. I can do the same thing over here. Right away, I could tell that this is a little bit too bright, so I could start turning some of these effects off to see what had happened here. That's kind of the beauty of being able to create nodes, is that if you made an adjustment layer, it would make life a lot harder to be able to find out what you might have screwed up, because you only have layers, and you don't want to make 13 layers for a single grade in Premiere Pro or Final Cut Pro. So I can start manipulating that just a little bit. And then they're here. Now I notice that this skin tone is going to be a lot darker than some of the other ones that are on here. So I can just go back into my skin node and I can actually just bring that up as well, just to give it a little bit more exposure. And then into here, I can do the same thing. So I'm just going to bring up my exposure again to bring that up. So this is kind of how we're looking, and I'm going to play a before and after of all of these clips put together. All right, that is pretty much everything in my DaVinci color grading tutorial. Now, again, this is just a basic way of how I grade my S-log3 footage, and you could use this on other log footage as well. So if you shoot on Canon or Fujifilm or Nikon, you can start using your log footage in this process today. I just use Sony because those are all the cameras that I have. But if you like videos like these and you want to know more tips and tutorials, leave a like for this video, leave a comment down below, share it with your friends if they're confused on how to use DaVinci Resolve color grading, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Peace.